Imagine a person who has lost everything that was dear to him: family, friends, home, health, freedom. A person who has been subjected to indescribable suffering, who has seen humanity at its worst. This is exactly what happened to Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust. Frankl was arrested in 1942 and taken to the Theresienstadt concentration camp, along with his wife and parents. There he witnessed unimaginable scenes: people dying of starvation, disease, torture, and mass murder. The loss of his loved ones was only the beginning. Frankl also lost his identity, his dignity, and his freedom. He was forced to work in inhumane conditions, with little food and no comfort. But what is most striking about Frankl's story is that despite everything he went through, he never lost hope. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl describes how he found a greater purpose in the midst of his suffering. He began to help other prisoners, giving them advice and emotional support. This gave him a sense of purpose and meaning, even in the midst of the horror. Frankl also discovered that even in the midst of utter desolation, there was a choice to be made. He could choose how to respond to the circumstances he found himself in. He could choose between despair and hope, between anger and compassion, and it was this choice that led him to find greater meaning in his life, even when all seemed lost. Frankl's experience of the Holocaust teaches us that loss is not the end. Loss can be a beginning, a stepping stone to finding new purpose, new meaning. And that's what Frankl meant when he said that when you lose everything, you can find everything. It's a lesson that continues to inspire millions of people around the world, reminding us that no matter what life throws at us, there is always a choice to be made. When we are in the midst of suffering, it is easy to feel like all is lost. Pain can be so overwhelming that it makes us question the purpose of our lives. However, it is precisely in these moments that we can find what Viktor Frankl called the deepest meaning. According to him, suffering is not just a bad experience that we need to overcome, but rather an opportunity to discover what is truly important to us. When we lose something or someone who was fundamental to our lives, we may feel as though a part of ourselves has been ripped away. This can lead to feelings of emptiness and hopelessness. However, it is precisely in this emptiness that we can find the space to reflect on what really matters. It is as if suffering has created an opportunity for us to rethink our values and priorities, and it is in this process of reflection that we can find new purpose and meaning in our lives. Frankl believed that suffering is not something we should avoid at all costs, but rather something we must face head-on. He said that suffering is an opportunity for us to find what he called the tragic meaning. This means that even in the midst of suffering, we can find purpose and meaning that gives us the strength and courage to move forward. And this meaning is not something that comes from outside, but rather something that arises from within ourselves as a response to suffering. When we are in the midst of suffering, it is easy to feel that God or fate has abandoned us. However, it is precisely in these moments that we can find a deeper connection with something greater than ourselves. Frankl believed that suffering can be an opportunity for us to find a connection with the divine, with life, or with humanity. And it is in this connection that we can find a sense of purpose and meaning that goes beyond our own suffering. The search for meaning in the midst of suffering is not easy. It is a process that requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to face pain and uncertainty. Yet it is precisely in this search that we can find what Frankl called the deepest meaning. It is a meaning that is not based on our circumstances, but rather on our ability to find purpose and meaning in the midst of suffering. And it is in this meaning that we can find the strength to move forward, even when all seems lost. When we think about losing everything, the first thing that comes to mind is the loss of our material possessions. However, Viktor Frankl reminds us that the loss of everything goes far beyond that. It is losing the freedom to come and go, to make choices, to live as we wish. It is being imprisoned in a concentration camp, as was the case with Frankl during the Second World War. It is losing autonomy over one's own body, over one's own life. But the loss of everything is not just about the loss of freedom. It is also about losing family, the loved ones who have given us unconditional support and love. It is about seeing parents, siblings, children and friends ripped away from us, not knowing if we will ever see them again. It is about feeling the deepest loneliness, the feeling of being completely alone in the world. Frankl lost his wife, his parents and his brother during the war, and yet he found a way to find meaning in the midst of suffering. Losing everything also means losing your health. It means feeling your body weakened, sick, without the strength to fight. It means seeing illness consume your life, taking away your ability to do the things you love. It means feeling pain, fatigue, and helplessness. Frankl suffered from serious illnesses during his time in the concentration camps, and yet he found a way to keep hope alive. And finally, the loss of everything is the loss of dignity. It is being treated as an object, a number, a prisoner, and not as a human being. It is being humiliated, ridiculed, tortured. It is losing one's identity, self-esteem, self-confidence. Frankl was subjected to inhumane conditions in the concentration camps, and yet he found a way to keep his dignity intact. However, it is precisely in this moment of losing everything that we can find everything. It is when we are at rock bottom that we can begin to build again. It is when we are left with nothing that we can begin to find the true meaning of life. Frankl teaches us that the loss of everything can be an opportunity to find something much more valuable, our own essence, our own humanity. When you grow up with dreams and ideals, it's natural to expect life to be fair and for things to go according to your plans. However, reality has a way of giving us a huge reality check, showing us that things don't always go as planned. And it's precisely at this moment that you're faced with the clash between idealism and cruel reality. So many times, we feel like we're walking the straight and narrow path, following the rules and doing everything right. But then suddenly, life takes a sharp turn and you find yourself in the middle of a storm. It's like you've built a sandcastle on the beach, and then a giant wave comes crashing down on it. Everything you thought you knew, everything you thought you had control, is shattered in an instant. And it is precisely at this moment that you must choose between two paths, the path of bitterness and anger, or the path of acceptance and change. You can choose to surrender to the pain and hopelessness, or you can choose to get up and start building again. It is a difficult time, but it is also a time of choice. Viktor Frankl, the famous Austrian psychologist, knew all too well about the clash between idealism and harsh reality. During World War II, he was imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp and lost everything that was important to him: his family, his home, his freedom. However, it was precisely in this situation that he discovered that life has a greater purpose than just survival. He discovered that even in the midst of pain and suffering, it is possible to find meaning and purpose. And that's what he wants to tell us, that when we lose everything, we can find everything. That in the midst of darkness, we can find light. That even when reality is cruel, we can find beauty and meaning. It's a difficult concept to understand, but it's also a liberating concept. It's a concept that allows us to look at life differently, with more courage and more hope. When we face difficult situations, it is common to question whether it is worth continuing to fight. Whether it is a personal loss, a financial crisis, or an illness, we often feel like there is no way out. And it is precisely at these moments that the choice between despair and resilience becomes crucial. Despair is an easy choice. It is the option that allows us to surrender to our circumstances, abandon our dreams and goals, and settle for mediocrity. But, as Viktor Frankl reminds us, it is precisely at this point that we must remember that we have the power to choose how we respond to situations. We can choose to either surrender to despair or find a way out, even if it is a difficult way out. Resilience, on the other hand, is a difficult choice. It is the choice that forces us to confront our fears, to get back up after a fall, and to find a new path. It is the choice that allows us to discover inner resources we never knew we had. Resilience is not the absence of pain or suffering, but rather the ability to transform that pain into something more. And it is precisely at this point that the choice between despair and resilience becomes an existential choice. When we choose resilience, we are choosing to live. We are choosing to find meaning in our lives, even in the most difficult moments. We are choosing to find a reason to keep fighting, even when all seems lost. But how do we make that choice? How do we find the strength to keep fighting when everything seems impossible? The answer lies in finding a purpose greater than our own problems. It is finding something that is more important than our pain and suffering. It is finding something that gives us the strength to keep going, even when we see no way out. And this is exactly where Viktor Frankl's philosophy can help us. For him, purpose is found in the search for meaning. It is finding a meaning greater than our own problems, a meaning that allows us to find a reason to keep fighting. And this search for meaning is not an easy search. It is a search that requires courage, determination, and perseverance. But it is precisely in this search that we find true freedom. It is precisely in this search that we find the ability to choose how we react to situations. It is precisely in this search that we find resilience, and it is precisely in this search that we find life. When we think of suffering, we usually associate it with pain, loss, and despair. But Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, presents us with a revolutionary perspective that suffering can be an opportunity to find meaning in our lives. According to Frankl, suffering is an inevitable part of human life. No one is immune to it. However, it is how we choose to deal with it that makes all the difference. Instead of giving in to pain and despair, we can choose to find meaning in our suffering. This does not mean that the suffering disappears, but rather that we find a reason to move forward in spite of it. Frankl developed his theory through his experiences in Nazi concentration camps, where he witnessed how people reacted to loss, pain, and death. He observed that those who found meaning in their suffering, even if it was simply a reason to help others, were the ones most likely to survive. Those who gave in to pain and despair were the ones who succumbed most quickly. For Frankl, meaning is not something we can find in easy circumstances, when everything is going well. It is precisely in the midst of suffering that we can find the true meaning of our lives. It is when we feel most lost and helpless that we can find our true reason for being. And it is this reason that gives us the strength to carry on, even when all seems lost. Frankl's theory also introduces us to the idea that suffering can be a form of self-transcendence. Instead of focusing on our own problems and pains, we can choose to focus on something bigger than ourselves. This could be helping others, finding a greater cause, or simply connecting with something deeper within ourselves. When we do this, our suffering becomes smaller and our lives gain new purpose. Furthermore, Frankl also highlights the importance of accepting suffering. Instead of fighting it or trying to escape it, we can choose to accept that it is a part of our lives. This does not mean that we enjoy suffering, but rather that we recognize it as an inevitable part of human life. And it is precisely this acceptance that allows us to find meaning in it. In short, Frankl's theory presents us with a revolutionary perspective on suffering. Instead of seeing it as something negative, we can choose to see it as an opportunity to find meaning in our lives. And it is precisely this choice that can give us the strength to move forward even when all seems lost. When we think about finding meaning in our lives, we often wonder where to look. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychologist and Holocaust survivor, proposed that there are three fundamental paths to finding meaning: work, love, and suffering. These three paths can guide us on our path to finding purpose and meaning. The first way is through work. For Frankl, work is not just an activity to earn money, but a way to express our values and abilities. When we engage in work that makes us feel fulfilled, we are, in a sense, finding meaning. This does not mean that the work is easy or that there are no challenges, but rather that by overcoming these challenges, we are growing and developing as human beings. In addition, work can also be a way of serving others, whether through a profession that helps people or an activity that contributes to the well-being of the community. The second way is love. Frankl believes that love is one of the most powerful sources of meaning in our lives. This is not limited to romantic love, but also love for people, nature, art, or life in general. When we love, we are connecting with something greater than ourselves, and this allows us to find meaning in our experiences. Furthermore, love can also be a way to overcome suffering, because when we are surrounded by people who love and support us, we are able to face challenges that would otherwise be impossible to overcome. The third path is suffering. This may be the hardest to accept, because no one wants to suffer. However, Frankl believes that suffering can be an opportunity to find meaning. This does not mean that suffering is desirable, but rather that when we face difficult challenges, we can find an opportunity for growth and development. When we suffer, we can choose how we respond to that situation. We can choose to either surrender to the suffering or find a way to overcome it. And it is precisely in this moment that we can find meaning, because we are showing ourselves that we are capable of overcoming obstacles and finding a reason to keep going. When we're in the midst of a storm, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. Adversity can make us question our purpose, our worth, and our reason for being. But it's precisely in these moments that we find the opportunity to rediscover what motivates us, what keeps us going. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, knew this well. He believed that purpose is what allows us to find meaning, even in the most difficult situations. When we lose everything, as Frankl lost his family and friends in the concentration camps, it is easy to feel lost and directionless. But that is precisely when we need to find a new purpose, a new meaning to life. This does not mean that we should forget what happened, but rather that we should learn to find deeper meaning in our experiences. Frankl believed that suffering can have a purpose if we learn to find meaning in it. A strong purpose can give us the strength to overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. When we know why we are doing something, when we know what we are fighting for, we can find the motivation to keep going, even when all seems lost. Frankl saw this firsthand when he was in the concentration camp. He saw people who had lost hope, who had lost the will to live, but he also saw people who had found purpose, who found a reason to keep going, and these people were the ones who had the best chance of surviving. But how do we find purpose in the midst of adversity? How do we find meaning in our difficult experiences? Frankl believed that the answer lies in finding a purpose that is greater than ourselves. When our purpose is greater than our problems, we can find the strength to overcome them. This doesn't mean that our problems disappear, but rather that we can find a way to deal with them more effectively. Finding purpose in the midst of adversity is not easy, but it is possible. It is a journey that requires courage, determination, and a willingness to find meaning in our experiences. Frankl knew that life is not easy, but he also knew that it is possible to find joy and purpose even in the most difficult situations. And that is precisely what he wanted us to learn, that life is precious, that life has meaning, and that we can find that meaning even when all seems lost. When we face suffering, it's common to feel powerless and out of control over our lives. However, Viktor Frankl teaches us that it's precisely in these moments that we can find an opportunity to rediscover purpose and meaning. And that starts with the attitude we choose to adopt in the face of suffering. Attitude is the most important factor that separates those who give up in the face of difficulties from those who find a way to overcome them. When we choose a positive attitude, even in the face of suffering, we are choosing not only how we will feel, but also how we will act and react to difficult situations. This does not mean that the suffering will disappear, but rather that we will find a way to deal with it more effectively. Frankl tells us that during his time in the concentration camp, he saw many people who, despite going through terrible experiences, managed to maintain an attitude of hope and resilience. These people not only survived the inhumane conditions of the camp, but they also found a way to maintain their dignity and humanity. And this was possible because of the attitude they chose to adopt. Attitude is what allows us to transform suffering into opportunities for growth. When we choose a positive attitude, we are choosing not only how we will deal with suffering, but also how we will extract something of value from it. This does not mean that suffering is good or desirable, but rather that we can find a way to learn from it and grow as people. Additionally, attitude also allows us to find a greater purpose in our lives. When we're going through a difficult time, it's common to feel lost and directionless. However, if we choose a positive attitude, we can begin to seek a greater purpose that goes beyond our suffering. This could be finding a way to help others, getting involved in a broader cause, or simply finding a way to connect with others on a deeper level. In short, attitude is what allows us to transform suffering into opportunities for growth and find greater purpose in our lives. When we choose a positive attitude, we are choosing not only how we will deal with suffering, but also how we will live our lives. And it is precisely this choice that can make all the difference between a life of suffering and a life of purpose and meaning. When you lose everything, it seems like the world is against you. The pain, the sadness, the feeling of loss, everything seems to conspire against you. But it is precisely at that moment that you have the opportunity to find everything again. It is when you are at rock bottom that you may discover that the only way out is up. And that is exactly what Viktor Frankl teaches us, that loss can be an opportunity to find everything again. Finding everything again is not just a matter of putting things back the way they were before. It is much more than that. It is an opportunity for redemption, for renewal, for creating something new from the ashes of what was lost. It is a chance to create a new purpose, a new reason to live. When you lose everything, you have the opportunity to rethink your life, to reevaluate your values, to find new meaning. Often, it takes losing everything to discover what really matters. It's when you're left with nothing that you can discover what's truly essential. It's when you're alone that you can discover who you really are. And that's exactly what Viktor Frankl teaches us, that loneliness, loss, pain can be opportunities to find the true meaning of life. Finding everything again is not easy. It is a painful, difficult process that requires courage, determination, and perseverance. But that is exactly what makes us grow, what makes us learn, what makes us discover who we are. And that is exactly what Viktor Frankl teaches us, that life is not easy, but that it is precisely in these difficult moments that we can find our true strength. When you lose everything, you have the opportunity to create a new story, a new identity. You have the opportunity to discover who you are without the things that defined you. You have the opportunity to find a new purpose, a new reason to live. And this is exactly what Viktor Frankl teaches us, that life is a story that we are constantly rewriting, and that it is precisely in these moments of loss that we can create a new chapter, richer, deeper, more meaningful. And in the end, Viktor Frankl teaches us that true freedom comes not from possessing everything, but from finding meaning in the midst of nothingness. That the loss of everything can become the gateway to finding everything again. That suffering can be transformed into purpose, and that the choice between despair and resilience is the choice between death and life. It's not easy, it's not natural, but it is possible. It is possible to find meaning in the midst of chaos. It is possible to find light in the darkness. It is possible to find everything again, even when everything seems lost. So we face the challenge. What is our purpose? What is our meaning? What will we choose? Despair or resilience? Viktor Frankl showed us that even in the midst of hell, it is possible to find everything again. And if he can, so can we. So let's choose. Let's choose to find meaning. Let's choose to find purpose. Let's choose to find everything again. Because in the end, it is choice that sets us free. So, have you ever felt lost, not knowing where to go? Viktor Frankl teaches us that it is exactly in these moments that we can find our true purpose. Now it's your turn to share with us. Comment below how you overcame a difficult time in your life and what you learned from that experience. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspirational and motivational content. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.